Hello, welcome to the Underworld with Christina, a show that descends, transforms, and rises again. The Underworld with Christina is a guided journey into the chthonic realms, a space where ancient stories, forgotten deities, and deep archetypes come alive. Each episode focuses on a different underworld or chthonic figure, force, or concept, exploring their mythology, symbolism, and presence in modern spiritual practice. After exploring the entity or the theme, the show shifts into practice. Depending on the episode, viewers may experience spell work inspired by the deity or the concept, ritual designed to help connect with the underworld current, or guided journeys that invite personal insight, shadow work, or transformation. The show frames the underworld not as a place of fear, but as a source of wisdom, rebirth, and magic. It's a space for seekers, witches, myth lovers, and anyone drawn to the deeper layers of the spiritual world. I'm Christina Wilkie Burbach, a spiritual transpersonal psychologist, a high priestess, ordained minister, anthropologist, death witch, death doula, death walker, psychopomp, psychic, modern mystic, occultist, cemeterian, and I work full time in the death care industry. My specialty is working with the dead. I am also the author of the book Gardens for Ghosts: The Art, Magic, and Ritual of Planting for the Dead. So last episode we talked about the ancient history of corpse magic, and that was kind of fun. So tonight we are going to pick up kind of where we left off, except we're going to talk about modern corpse magic and bone magic and utilizing some of these concepts in an ethical way in a modern witchcraft or spiritual practice. I'd like to start with some contemplation questions. And this type of magic is definitely not for everyone. I think it's absolutely for people that have a reverence for death and dying and the afterlife and for the magic of the human body. And it's definitely heavy magic. So I have some contemplation questions for you to kind of ponder as we get ready to talk about utilizing some bones and cremains and body parts and skulls in a more modern ethical magical practice. So if we're exploring the deeper symbolism and spiritual dimensions of corpse magic, bones, teeth, and blood, these questions, journal questions, contemplation questions, can help guide reflection, ritual preparation, or just personal study. So some things to think about or ask yourself, or like I said, this is a great journal. Good journal questions are really good for your book of mirrors. So a book of mirrors, a lot of us know what a book of shadows is, a book of our spells and our ingredients and correspondences that we often kind of keep private. A book of mirrors is private too, but it's a private witch's development journal. And if this is a type of practice, corpse magic or death witchcraft that you want to move yourself into, I think these questions are really important. Something I've been pondering a lot lately, and actually asked Star if we could do a panel for my show on people who kind of fetishize death, people who romanticize death and bones and skulls. I think a lot of people, like working full time in death care, in the cemetery, in the funeral industry, I honestly don't think a lot of people could actually do the work that I and others do, like hospice nurses, funeral directors, on a daily basis. I think a lot of people romanticize bones, they're very gothic and dark and edgy. And I think it's really important to answer these questions before you consider doing death witchcraft or bone magic or skull magic, to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. So how does the concept of corpse magic differ to you from general necromancy, and what ethical boundaries should guide its practice? In many traditions, the body is seen as a vessel of spirit. How might this view influence the way we approach corpse magic, especially in a modern witchcraft or a modern framework? What role does the sacred spirit of the deceased play in magical work? And how can we honor that spirit without exploiting it? Why are bones considered to you a bridge between the physical and the metaphysical? And how does this symbolism affect their use in spell work? How do the specific parts of a bone or a tooth, like a skull, a tusk, a claw, influence the energy and intent of a magical working? In osteomancy, so reading bones and bone throwing, and other divinatory practices, how do the shapes and the positions of the bones carry meaning to you? How can we ensure the sourcing of bones and teeth is done ethically without causing harm to animals or disrespecting their spirits? Oh my gosh, go to an oddity show. I know there's like an oddity circuit that makes its way through all major cities in the United States, and you go there, and all you see is like a lot of taxidermy animals. But I feel like every vendor has like little blue butterflies, like taxidermy that you can buy, like little shadow box type setting, and they all say like collected ethically, or people who sell bone jewelry or skulls, such as like ones that I have behind me. How can we ensure that they collect them ethically? I know they say that. So how can we make sure that we, when we buy bones, animal or human, from vendors and other, witches and small businesses, how can we assure that they're sourced ethically without harming animals or disrespecting their spirits? I think that's really, really, really important. And after these questions, the first thing I'm going to kind of kick it off with is how to ethically and legally own bones. Blood is often linked to life force, vitality, and ancestral connection. How might this symbolism be applied in protective or healing magic? In shadow magic and dark moon work, I'm not talking about anything negative or evil here, just like shadow magic, more misunderstood, or dark moon work. How can blood be used as a conduit for transformation or confrontation with the darker aspects of yourself? What are spiritual and practical considerations for working with blood, especially in relation to consent, purity, and sacredness? And I know oftentimes in certain types of blood magic, people will use their own. They'll prick their finger. They'll make sure everything is clean and sterile. They'll prick their finger. I do know, some people use menstrual blood in magic and spell work. So once again, it's not for everyone, but often, some of the safest and most ethical ways to use blood is to use your own. How might plant-based or symbolic substitutes be used to channel similar energies without ethical concerns? For example, I know beet juice can definitely, the beets, like the vegetable, the root vegetable, can absolutely be a alternative to blood magic, or dragon blood can absolutely be an alternative instead of using blood. So some of the things I'll talk about is doing like corpse magic or bone magic without a corpse. There are a lot of different things that you can utilize. So we have a lot to cover tonight, and this might be split into two segments depending on how much I can cover. How can the use of bones, teeth, and blood be integrated into a broader magical philosophy that respects all life? What rituals or consecrations can help cleanse and honor these materials before use? How might these elements be used to connect with ancestors, spirit animals, or the earth's primal energies? In what ways can such practices deepen your self awareness, ancestral connection, and spiritual resilience? So, these questions overall, you can go back and listen to this recording again, absolutely are questions that can serve as a foundation for personal reflection, to help you design rituals, for academic exploration, and they help ensure that any work with these potent materials, bones, blood, teeth, skull, that is both powerful and ethically grounded. But the biggest question I want you to ask yourself is, why do you want to do or practice death magic, corpse magic? Why do you want to utilize teeth, bones, blood, skulls as a magical ingredient? Like I said, I really, really want people to ponder and self-reflect. And this is shadow work. When we look deep within ourselves and bring up some of those difficult questions, especially internally, like, why do you want to do this type of magic? Are you romanticizing death, or are you fetishizing death? Please, really deeply explore those questions within yourself, because I think a lot of people do it because, like I said, it's edgy, it's gothic, it's cool. So, but half of you wouldn't even last a day doing the type of work that I do, digging a grave for someone, placing someone in their final resting place, that sort of stuff. So please moving forward here, do this sort of stuff with a reverence for death and dying in the body and the magic of the body, and really ponder, why this is important to you to learn this sort of stuff. I have a little simple spell for starting to kind of tap into the exploration of corpse magic for you. So, most of you are probably corpse magic beginners. So, if you're starting to explore the concept of corpse magic, this is a very low level, beginner friendly spell that can help you start to work with the energy of the dead without being overcomplicated. So, here's a very simple example inspired by traditional necromantic practices adapted for safety and clarity. So I'm going to call this spell Calling the Still. And the purpose is to gently connect with the energy of a corpse or a grave, inviting its presence for guidance or protection. So as you kind of prepare to do your spell, choose a very quiet and respectful location. You can do this in a grave site or a cemetery. You can do this in a secluded spot or a symbolic grave in your home. You can do this at your death altar if you do have a death altar or an ancestral altar. So choose with intent, a quiet and respectful location. And then light a candle. Definitely recommend either a white candle or a black candle. And I always love to burn incense when I do this sort of work, sandalwood, myrrh, frankincense. I encourage you to put a small offering wherever you're doing your work, like a single grain of salt, a drop of water, or a small leaf to represent respect. And then, depending on your tradition, I'm not policing or gatekeeping your tradition. I do encourage you to protect yourself. Set a circle for those of you that cast circles. Draw a small circle on the ground or on a cloth or around you in the air, however you protect yourself. And then you can also inscribe a cross or sigil of protection. You can do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, whatever works for you for protection. And it's just important to do some sort of protective work, bubbling yourself, a circle, watchtowers, whatever you want to do according to your tradition, because it creates a boundary for the energy. And then after you protect yourself, you want to bless the space. So say something along the lines of, by the light of the moon and the stillness of the grave, I set this place in peace. And then we call the still, and you whisper this part of the spell. So, still one, come to me in silence. I call you not to harm, but to guide. And then we place your centering at the center of the circle. And if you didn't already light your candle, light the candle. And this is a sign of respect. And then just be quiet, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and listen and receive. Receive a message, listen, uh, have mindfulness, feel, in your body. Just listen very quietly, focusing on that energy. And you may feel a sense of stillness, warmth, or faint presence. And do not force interaction. The goal is to connect, not to control. And then after you spend some time connecting with the dead, we want to close our circle or close our protection, close our ritual down by thanking the energy. Thank you for your stillness. I release you back to peace. And then remove the offering and the candle, snuff the candle out, and then cleanse the space with salt or water or smoke or whatever your tradition entails. So just kind of starting very simply to start to connect with the energy of the dead. Some ethical and legal considerations in modern corpse magic. Some things to ponder here. So, modern corpse magic, whether in occult, ceremonial, or esoteric traditions, involves the use of human remains, bodily fluids, or other remains in a ritual or symbolic practice. While such practices may be culturally or spiritually meaningful, they raise significant ethical and legal concerns that must be addressed. So do not disrespect the dead. Don't be nasty. Come on. We're not here to desecrate graves or dig up graves or anything like that. So I want you to ponder and consider like the dignity of the deceased. So forensic and medical ethics emphasize that the dignity of the human corpse should be respected in all handling, including in non-medical contexts. This means avoiding disrespectful treatment, ensuring privacy, and recognizing the deceased as a person, not as a resource, not as a tool. So, for those of you that do work in hospice or as a death doula or death walker or in the funeral home, like, even though the person has passed away, we still treat the body very respectfully. And that goes when you're using the bones and the remains and the teeth and so forth in corpse magic. We always treat it with the utmost dignity and the utmost respect. And this includes if you choose to use human remains or animal remains. They're still a deceased person. That is a deceased person's vessel. It's not a tool. It's not merely a resource. Informed consent. In modern medicine, informed consent is a cornerstone of ethical practice. So, in occult or ceremonial magic, consent is often absent or implicit. I don't like this. You can absolutely ask the spirit of the bones or the teeth or the blood, etc., if you have permission to utilize their remains in magic and spell work. So, this can be for some people that kind of struggle with their intuition. You just close your eyes and imagine that you're connecting with that spirit of that bone, of that skull, and ask, do I have permission to utilize the magic in your corpse? Do I have permission to utilize the magic in your bones? And, for me, I see like a yes or a no, and you need to respect the answer. You can also use a pendulum, or you can use tarot cards, whatever you utilize for in divination to get a yes or a no answer. So we absolutely would like to get consent from the spirit of those bones if possible. And if you can't, you can also try to get permission from their legal representative, ideally in writing. That might not always be the case, but absolutely ask the spirit of the bones, of the teeth, of the blood, human or animal, do I have permission to utilize this in magic? We also have to be very cultural and religious sensitive. So corpse use varies around the world in different cultures and different religions. In some traditions, the body is sacred. In others, it's a resource. So ethical magic must respect these differences and avoid practices that violate cultural taboos or religious prohibitions. And then historically, corpse medicine, like we talked about in the last episode, the rich making tinctures out of corpse and body parts and utilizing it for a whole plethora of reasons. So most of the time that was done without consent. So it was unregulated and done without consent and without permission. So modern ethical standards demand transparency or accountability and respect for bodily autonomy, moving away from exploitive or taboo practices. So we're not, like I said, why are you doing corpse magic? Why are you wanting to practice death witchcraft? To be edgy, to exploit the dead? Or are you doing this because, what are your reasons for doing this? Really look deep within yourself. Some legal considerations to take in mind. So, in some jurisdictions, common law traditionally recognizes no property in a corpse. However, courts have acknowledged that body parts can acquire property like status if they're preserved, processed, or used for teaching or desiccation. In occult context, similar principles may apply if parts are preserved, altered, or displayed. And we'll talk in just a second how to own bones legally. If a body or a part is removed without legal authority, it can be prosecuted under theft or misappropriation laws. Even if the body is not property in the traditional sense, the purpose of use can determine legal standing. Like I said, don't be digging up bones. Don't be like, there's a reason why a funeral director or a funeral director assistant needs to sit with the at the funeral until the body is fully in the ground, in the vault, or into the crypt when it's a full body. I mean, because body theft was definitely a big thing in the Victorian era, and body theft can still happen. I know I have a client of mine that is an armed guard at a morgue. So we very much protect our dead because body theft and desecration is definitely a thing. So we definitely want to make sure we do everything legally and we don't do anything like desecration or anything like that. And then in medical and forensic contexts, corpse use is regulated by laws such as the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act in the US, which governs organ tissue and bone donation. While occult magic is outside medical regulation, similar principles of donor intent and legal authorization should be applied to avoid legal conflict. And then in jurisdiction variations, legal rules differ by country and state. Some jurisdictions have specific laws on corpse display, preservation, or use in ceremonies. Practitioners should research local laws to ensure compliance. And I know different parts of the world have different laws and too. So definitely make sure you know what's legal wherever you live in the world. So, just to kind of summarize best practices for ethical and legal use, you want to try to obtain explicit consent from the donor. You want to respect cultural and religious norms of the deceased community. You absolutely need to avoid exploitative or disrespectful treatment of the body. Definitely consult legal counsel to ensure compliance with local laws if just to best protect yourself. And then consider alternatives like symbolic substitutes, like skull candles, or like we're talking about with blood, like using beet juice or pomegranate juice or dragon's blood as a symbolic substitute if legal or ethical or moral or spiritual concerns are significant. So, in short, modern corpse magic can be ethically and legally sound only if it's grounded in respect, consent, transparency, and legal compliance. And then also, like I said, like your own spiritual and moral beliefs and principles that align with both medical ethics and contemporary legal frameworks. So you got a lot of, make sure what you're doing is legal, and you got a lot of insight pondering to do here to make sure you're doing what you're doing for the right reasons. I want to talk a little bit about owning human bones here. So once again, be aware of the laws wherever you live in the world, because each state has its own abuse of corpse laws. Because of abuse of corpse laws, nobody's body can be claimed as property. The law may differ from state to state, but none of them allow for a funeral home to hand over a skull to surviving relatives. Okay, so when Grampy dies, you cannot get his skull. While you can't claim a human skull, there is nothing saying you can't own one. It's all about how you acquire the skull or the bones. So it's perfectly legal to possess and sell human bones in the United States. You do not need paperwork to own a human skull. There are a couple exceptions to this, as a few states have banned import and export, like Louisiana, Georgia, and Minnesota, and Tennessee. So most commonly, it's illegal to sell human remains that have been unlawfully removed from a place of burial. So under no circumstances should archaeological indigenous human bones be owned, bought, or sold within the public domain. Owning, buying, or selling these types of remains can incur a hefty fine and prison time. The most human bones and skulls that are available for purchase are ex-medical remains, and those are completely legal to own, buy, and sell worldwide as long as they're from before the 1980s ban. And that ban in the 1980s prohibited the sale of human remains for private medical use. And then this is a very, very, very gray area, but archaeological human bones are mostly legal as long as they look over 100 years old. 100 years old. So there are two resources where you can go and shop around for bones. There is a website called The Bone Room. So www.boneroom.com, BONEROOM.com, The Bone Room. You can go shopping for bones and skulls, etc. And Jones Bones. So John's Bones, www.jonsbones.com. So those are some places, my mom, my mom kept all of her baby teeth from me and my two sisters when we were growing up. And last summer, she gave us each all of our teeth back. So you can definitely, do things like that. Your children's teeth, your own teeth, that sort of stuff. Some things to ponder or think about. Utilizing your own body parts. I mean, but don't go cutting your arm off or anything like that. We will absolutely have to split this episode into two. So I just want you some more pondering questions to kind of end this episode here, and then the next episode in 2 weeks we'll get more into like home protection spells, morning jars, doing spell work with cremains, thinking about what type of energy and magic you want your body to release when you pass away, and that can help you decide how you want to be disposed of, or how you want to be buried when you pass away. So these are kind of your additional pondering and journal questions for your book of mirrors here before we get more into different types of spell work. So, if you're going to use human remains, I think it's really, really important to ponder, think about whose remains are you using and why. What is your intent? Why do you want to use those bones? Why do you want to use those teeth? And we talked about in the last episode different body parts and their meanings behind them. So why do you want to use a bone? Why do you want to use a finger bone? Why do you want to use a fingernail? Why do you want to use blood? Why do you want to use teeth or skull, etc.? So whose remains are you using? What remains are you using, and why? You also need to think about how that person died, because the energy of someone, how they died, suicide, a traumatic accident, passing away peacefully in bed of old age, how someone dies is absolutely part of the energy of that bone or their remains. So how do they die? What was their profession? What were their talents, their characteristics, their traits, and their personalities? Because that magic is in that bone or that tooth or that blood. What is their relationship to you, if any? So, those are definitely some pondering questions to think about if you want to use human bones or human remains. And then for animal corpses, so animal remains should also be absolutely treated with utmost respect. They should be ethically acquired, and I absolutely don't you dare damn harm an animal. So do not absolutely encourage or endorse the harming of animals in any way. And this this does not necessarily include hunting. For those of you that are hunters, who I have a number of friends that are hunters or family members that are hunters, and but then they do utilize every single part of the animal to make like bone soup, make use animal skin for clothing, for blankets, use a bone for jewelry. So they absolutely, and they eat the meat of the animal. So hunting aside, but I think those are some ethical questions you need to ask yourself. So same thing with the animal. How did they die? Roadkill, being hit by a car, is going to be much different energy than like a bird falling out of a tree or an animal that just died of old age. So same thing. How do they die? That energy is trapped in their bones. What do they represent symbolically? A lot of different deities are connected with different animals. So what do the animals represent? What is their place in different folklores from around the world and different mythologies? Once again, their connection to different deities. And then once again, their relationship to you, if any. Were they your pet? Were they your familiar, etc.? So lots of pondering questions. I think that bone magic, blood magic, corpse magic, death witchcraft is some of the very, very powerful magic, but it is a little shadow magic. It is a little darker magic. And by darker and shadow, once again, I do not mean evil or anything like that. Not at all. I don't believe in good. I don't believe in evil. I don't believe in black. I don't believe in white. I think you really have to justify and look within yourself why you're doing this type of magic. So you have lots of questions to ponder and think about before we pick up next episode with actual corpse magic spells and ideas. And I also have lots of ideas how to use items like symbolically, not actually use actual corpses or bones or blood, etc. So lots of thinking to think about. And the biggest question I want you to ask yourself is, do you romanticize death, and do you fetishize it? Like, why are you attracted to death and dying? Why do you want to practice this type of magic? And you better have a good answer for me next week when we return to the Underworld with Christina. You can find me all over the web, www.mindsoulandself.com. Google me, Christina Wilkie Burbach. You can find me all over social media, Instagram. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. And I will see you in 2 weeks on the next episode of the Underworld with Christina, where we dive a little deeper into doing spell work with cremains and with different corpse and body parts. Thank you very much, and I'll see you later.